For nearly 3 years, the world has been told a simple story about Ukraine. Russia invaded, Ukraine resisted, the West responded with aid, sanctions, and speeches about democracy. On television, it looks straightforward. On paper, it seemed predictable. But history is rarely shaped by what the public sees. It is shaped by what happens quietly, far from cameras, press briefings, and official statements. And in late 2025, something unusual began to surface. Not through headlines, but through whispers. Diplomats in Eastern Europe noticed sudden changes in tone. Ukrainian officials began speaking with unexpected confidence behind closed doors. Energy markets reacted before any announcement was made, and intelligence analysts in Washington started connecting dots that weren't supposed to line up. All signs pointed to one unsettling possibility. Donald Trump had engineered a secret Ukraine deal, one designed not just to end a war, but to dismantle Russia's imperial power permanently. This wasn't diplomacy as usual. This wasn't NATO consensus, and it certainly wasn't charity. This was strategy. A parallel track. Outside the system. During Trump's political resurgence, many assumed his Ukraine position would be simple: reduce funding, pressure Kiev, and focus inward. That assumption turned out to be dangerously wrong. According to multiple diplomatic leaks and intelligence assessments, Trump AS team had been operating on a parallel track, bypassing traditional NATO channels and engaging directly with key power brokers. These discussions involved former U.S. national security officials from the Trump era, Ukrainian military and intelligence leadership, energy strategists and reconstruction planners, intermediaries in Turkey, the Gulf, and Eastern Europe. None of this was public. None of it went through Congress. And none of it followed the usual Western playbook. Because the goal was not to manage the war. The goal was to reshape the post-war world. Why Trump's strategy was different. Every U.S. administration before had treated Russia as a problem to be contained. Trump treated Russia as an empire to be unraveled. That distinction matters. Empires do not collapse because of battlefield losses alone. They collapse when their economic model breaks, their influence evaporates, and their fear no longer works. Instead of endless aid, the proposed deal focused on conditional dominance. Ukraine wouldn't receive blank checks. It would receive tools, military, economic, and strategic, designed to force Russia into a corner where every move made things worse. This included precision military superiority rather than manpower, parity economic triggers tied to Russian escalation, and long-term energy restructuring that permanently locked Russia out of Europe. In simple terms, Russia could keep fighting, but it would be bleeding itself dry. The energy weapon. Nobody talks about Russia's empire does not rest on ideology. It rests on energy. For decades, Moscow used oil and gas as political weapons. Entire countries structured their economies around Russian pipelines. Fear of energy shortages kept Europe cautious and divided. Trump's secret deal attacked this foundation directly. Leaked frameworks suggest a coordinated push to redirect European energy infrastructure away from Russia, fast-track alternative suppliers through Ukraine and Eastern Europe, tie Russian energy access to irreversible political concessions. This wasn't just sanctioning Russia, this was replacing it. Once energy dependence disappears, fear disappears with it. And without fear, an empire becomes just a large, expensive liability. Why Ukraine accepted the risk? From Ukraine's perspective, the deal was risky, but transformative. Instead of remaining a dependent battlefield state, Ukraine would become a central energy corridor, a reconstruction hub, a permanent strategic partner, not a charity case. The deal positioned Ukraine as indispensable, not expendable. But there was a price. Ukraine would have to commit to long-term alignment, transparency, and post-war restructuring under strict conditions. This wasn't emotional support. This was transactional power politics. Kyiv accepted because the alternative was worse. Endless war, endless aid, and no guarantee of victory. Trump offered something different. A way to win without fighting forever. Moscow's silent panic. The Kremlin never publicly acknowledged the deal, but their behavior changed. Russian state media shifted tone. Energy export strategies quietly adjusted. And internal security measures intensified. These are not signs of confidence. They are signs of preparation. Russian leadership understood something the public did not. This deal attacked Russia's future, not its present. Even if Moscow held territory, it would lose relevance. Even if it survived sanctions, it would lose markets. And even if it maintained control at home, it would face growing fractures across its regions. Empires can survive defeat. They cannot survive irrelevance. Why this was kept secret? If the deal is so powerful, why wasn't it announced? Because announcing it would give Russia time to adapt, time to sabotage, time to divide allies. Trump's strategy relied on shock and inevitability. By the time the framework became visible, the pieces would already be in place. Energy contracts signed, alliances locked, and leverage gone. History shows this pattern clearly. The most decisive geopolitical moves are rarely declared. They are revealed after they've already worked. The beginning of the end. Part one of this story is not about battles or speeches. It is about something far more dangerous. It is about a deal designed to make an empire obsolete. Russia's power has always depended on being feared, needed, and unavoidable. Trump's secret Ukraine strategy challenged all three at once. And if even half of this framework becomes reality, the war in Ukraine will not be remembered as a regional conflict. It will be remembered as the moment the Russian Empire began to disappear, quietly, methodically, and forever. At first glance, Russia seems untouchable. It is the world's largest country by landmass, home to vast natural resources, and armed with one of the most formidable militaries on Earth. On paper, it projects strength and confidence, but the truth is far more fragile. Russia's power is not evenly distributed. Its economy is heavily dependent on a few critical pillars: energy exports, natural resources, and leverage over its former satellite states. According to 2025 estimates, nearly 40% of the federal budget comes directly from oil and gas revenues. Every dollar lost from these exports ripples through the Kremlin's ability to fund its military, maintain domestic loyalty, and enforce influence abroad. And that is where Trump's secret Ukraine deal strikes hardest. Energy dependence as the Achilles heel. Western sanctions have targeted Russia's economy for years, yet they have never fully dismantled its global influence. Why? Because Europe and Asia remained partially dependent on Russian energy. As long as pipelines flowed, Moscow held leverage. Trump's strategy changed this dynamic entirely. Leaked elements of the deal revealed plans to expand Ukrainian natural gas transit routes with US and European support, accelerate LNG infrastructure in Eastern Europe, reducing Moscow's energy monopoly, promote alternative energy sources, including nuclear and renewable energy, and former Soviet-aligned states tie energy access to clear political conditions and enforceable guarantees. By decoupling Europe from Russian energy dependence, Trump's deal removes Russia's most potent weapon, fear of energy shortages. Without energy leverage, Russia is no longer indispensable, and an empire without indispensability is an empire on borrowed time. Economic strangulation in real time. Unlike previous sanctions regimes, which Moscow could evade or adapt to, this deal weaponizes time itself. Every day that Russia continues its military campaigns without access to stable energy revenues accelerates its internal collapse. Consider the scenario. The Kremlin spends billions on military operations in Ukraine. Energy revenues decline steadily as alternative supply lines bypass Russia. Inflation rises, making imports and domestic living costs unbearable. Military morale suffers as soldiers realize the state cannot sustain prolonged operations. This is a slow-motion economic strangulation. It does not require an invasion or a large-scale strike. It merely exploits the vulnerability that Russia's empire has always had, a dependence on external markets it can no longer control. And because the deal includes conditions for post-war reconstruction and energy redistribution, Russia's recovery options are deliberately limited. Any attempt to negotiate or reassert dominance only triggers stricter economic penalties. In other words, every step Moscow takes deepens its own crisis. Psychological warfare on the elite empires are held together by two things: loyalty and fear. Trump's secret deal attacks both. Inside Russia, the elite, oligarchs, regional governors, and military commanders are watching their wealth and influence erode. As the Kremlin loses energy leverage and economic control, internal competition grows. Leaked intelligence reports suggest some governors began diverting resources to protect local industries, fearing Moscow's inability to pay. Military commanders have expressed frustration over underfunded operations and misaligned strategies. Oligarchs are quietly moving assets abroad to hedge against a prolonged economic collapse. History shows that once an empire's elite loses confidence in the central government, rebellion, corruption, and passive resistance multiply. Unlike battlefield defeats, this kind of decay cannot be reversed with tanks or missiles. Trump's strategy exploits this psychological vulnerability. By removing hope, Russia is forced to fight itself. The post-war geopolitical reshaping. The secret deal isn't only about Russia's internal collapse, it also reshapes the global balance of power. Europe, long reliant on Moscow's energy, suddenly gains alternatives. The United States, acting through Ukraine and strategic partners, cements long-term influence in Eastern Europe. And Russia, isolated and economically weakened, loses the ability to project power beyond its borders. Even China watches carefully. Moscow has long served as Beijing's strategic buffer. A weakened Russia means China faces increased diplomatic pressure without a strong ally to counterbalance the West-Eastern Europe, becomes a potential hub for US-led trade and energy influence. The credibility of anti-Western coalitions diminishes. This global ripple effect adds further pressure on Moscow. Internal collapse is compounded by strategic irrelevance on the world stage. An empire without influence is an empire in decline. Military weakness. Exposed. Russia's military is formidable, but its strength depends on logistics, supply lines, and morale. Trump's secret deal targets all three, albeit indirectly. Supply routes are threatened by alternative energy corridors controlled by Ukraine and the West. Funding for advanced weapons programs is compromised as oil revenues shrink. Troops are demoralized by extended deployments without clear strategic gain or sufficient support. The result is a paradox. Russia can still fight, but each day it fights, it becomes weaker. Each battlefield victory is offset by growing economic and political instability at home. This creates a vicious cycle. Moscow cannot win decisively, cannot withdraw safely, and cannot maintain cohesion internally. Over time, this grinds the empire down from both ends. The fragile fabric of Russian federal control. Russia is not monolithic. Its vast territory is a patchwork of ethnic regions, resource-rich zones, and politically sensitive republics. Historically, Moscow has maintained control through a combination of coercion, incentives, and centralized funding. Trump's deal undermines this control. Economic contraction reduces federal funding for provinces. Energy independence in certain regions encourages local governments to act autonomously. Military focus on Ukraine diverts attention from domestic oversight. As regions gain self-sufficiency and confidence, loyalty to the Kremlin becomes conditional, not absolute. Chechnya, Dagestan, Siberia all watch closely. Each fracture weakens Moscow's grip and erodes the perception of imperial unity. Empires fall slowly when control slips quietly. The public may not notice until it's too late. Why Russia's collapse is inevitable if the plan succeeds. Put simply, the secret deal is designed to hit Russia where it hurts most, economically, psychologically, and strategically. Unlike conventional warfare, which can be delayed or resisted, this plan leverages economic dependence. By removing energy leverage, the Kremlin loses both funding and influence. Elite fractures. As governors and oligarchs lose confidence, loyalty erodes. Military pressure. Troops are forced to operate without resources or clear strategic gains. Geopolitical isolation. Former allies reassess alliances. China recalibrates. Europe gains autonomy. Psychological fatigue. Citizens, soldiers, and bureaucrats alike realize the empire cannot sustain itself. When combined, these factors make reversal nearly impossible. Unlike a sudden invasion or political coup, this type of collapse is silent, methodical, and ultimately irreversible. While Part 1 revealed the existence of Trump's secret deal, Part 2 explains why it is so dangerous for Russia. This is not about tanks or immediate battlefield victories. This is about an empire unraveling from multiple angles simultaneously, economically, strategically, and psychologically. Russia may survive in the short term. It may hold territory. But the cracks are now visible. Once the deal fully activates, Moscow will be forced to confront a stark reality, an empire that can no longer afford itself, control its people, or influence the world. The question is not if Russia will collapse. The question is how long it will take, and how quietly history will remember the end of a once mighty empire. Europe, a freed continent. For decades, Europe's relationship with Russia has been defined by fear and dependency. Pipelines stretched across Eastern Europe gave Moscow leverage, and the threat of energy shortages dictated policy. Trump's secret Ukraine deal undermines this dynamic. By supporting alternative energy routes and fast-tracking Ukrainian and European infrastructure, the deal essentially liberates Europe from Russian influence. Consider the immediate effects. Germany, Italy, and Poland gain multiple energy sources, reducing Moscow's ability to manipulate prices or create artificial shortages. Eastern European countries no longer rely on Russian goodwill to keep lights on or factories running. Regional cooperation strengthens, giving the United States long-term influence over political and economic structures that were once within Moscow's sphere. For Europe, this is more than energy independence. It is a strategic awakening. Decades of caution are replaced with bold autonomy, and for the first time in generations, Europe can make policy without fearing Moscow's retaliation. The United States. Strategic leverage. Restored Trump's secret deal is not only about weakening Russia, it is about restoring American influence in the region. Unlike previous administrations that relied heavily on incremental diplomacy or symbolic gestures, this plan provides the United States with tangible leverage. Energy markets realigned under American oversight. Reconstruction contracts in Ukraine tied to long-term U.S. involvement, military and intelligence coordination giving Washington a central role in shaping Eastern Europe's post-war future. In short, the United States positions itself as the architect of a new regional order. By quietly dismantling Russia's ability to intimidate, Trump's strategy allows Washington to act decisively, without risking open conflict or global condemnation. The brilliance of the plan lies in its subtlety. The world sees a war in Ukraine, but few notice that power has quietly shifted from Moscow to Washington. China's calculations. No global shockwave is complete without China. Beijing has long relied on Russia as a strategic partner, a buffer against Western influence in Europe and the Pacific. A weakened Russia changes that equation entirely. Leaked intelligence suggests Chinese analysts are already recalculating. Russia can no longer serve as a counterweight to U.S. influence in Europe. Beijing may need to rethink its Belt and Road projects if Moscow cannot guarantee stability. Eastern European nations, previously dependent on Moscow, may now pivot toward American economic and military support. In essence, Trump's secret deal indirectly pressures China to reconsider its global ambitions. By undermining Russia, the plan creates a domino effect that reshapes the broader balance of power. Middle East, energy markets in flux. Russia's weakening also sends immediate tremors through Middle Eastern energy markets. Countries in the Gulf find themselves in a stronger negotiating position as Russian oil and gas contracts are disrupted. Alternative pipelines and supply routes allow Europe and Asia to reduce reliance on volatile regions, creating new alliances. Investors begin hedging, anticipating that Russia can no longer reliably supply energy at previous volumes. These changes are not hypothetical. Financial data from late 2025 shows early signs of market adjustments. Oil futures fluctuated as traders reacted to leaked energy agreements, and long-term contracts for Russian supply were quietly renegotiated. The lesson is clear. A weakening Russia destabilizes energy markets far beyond Eastern Europe, affecting global economies from Tokyo to Houston. Internal Russian strains. While external pressure grows, internal strain within Russia intensifies. Inflation rises as the economy contracts under energy disruption and sanctions. Citizens face shortages, reduced purchasing power, and declining quality of life. Regional governors and oligarchs begin hoarding resources, diverting attention from Moscow's central authority. Military morale deteriorates as soldiers face underfunded operations and unclear objectives. Unlike a conventional war, this collapse is not sudden. It is slow, grinding, and inevitable. Each day the Russian government loses control over regions, financial resources, and public trust. Even loyal allies begin to reassess their positions. Countries once aligned with Moscow may seek new partnerships to avoid economic fallout, further isolating the Kremlin. Psychological shockwaves. Beyond economics and politics, the deal inflicts psychological damage on multiple levels. To Moscow, leadership sees the empire's foundations eroding and realizes military force alone cannot fix it. To Europe, countries previously hesitant to challenge Russia now feel emboldened, creating a unified front. To the United States, confidence grows in America's ability to influence global outcomes without open war. Psychological pressure is often underestimated in geopolitical conflicts, but it can be decisive. Empires that lose the confidence of their people and allies rarely survive. The domino effect on global alliances. The combination of economic isolation, energy reconfiguration, and psychological pressure triggers domino effects across the world. NATO's cohesion strengthens as the U.S. demonstrates tangible influence over Europe. Middle Eastern nations diversify energy and military partnerships, reducing Moscow's leverage. Asia, including China, reassesses strategic alliances and trade dependencies. Latin American and African nations observe the collapse as a cautionary tale, recalibrating their own foreign policies. Each reaction feeds the next. What began as a secret deal in Washington becomes a global cascade, reshaping alliances and power dynamics without a single public war declaration. Russia's strategic isolation. By the end of this phase, Russia is no longer an isolated battlefield actor. It is a geopolitical outlier. Economically weak and resource-constrained, politically fractured internally, lacking influence over allies, militarily overstretched. This is not simply a country losing a war, it is an empire losing relevance. Its global influence diminishes quietly but irreversibly, the world watching, unaware. Perhaps the most striking aspect of this shockwave is how little the global public understands its scale. Headlines focus on daily battles, aid packages, or diplomatic statements. Few grasp the magnitude of a plan that simultaneously undermines an empire economically, strategically, and psychologically. Yet the effects are already visible. Energy markets adjusting, alliances shifting, and Russia internally destabilizing. What is unfolding is not just a regional conflict. It is the quiet reshaping of the global order, a process that will echo for decades. The secret deal's genius lies in its subtlety. While the world debates military movements in Ukraine, Trump's strategy quietly undermines Russia's economy, erodes its alliances, weakens its military morale, shifts global energy and political power toward the West. In other words, this is not just a war plan, it is a blueprint for permanent geopolitical transformation. Russia may survive physically, its leaders may cling to power, but in the grand chessboard of global strategy, the empire's days are numbered, and when the dust settles, the world will be profoundly different, more aligned with American influence, more resilient against Russian coercion, and more economically independent from Moscow's control. The world has watched Russia's aggression for years, but very few understood how vulnerable its empire truly was. While headlines focused on military advances, aid packages, and political posturing, the secret deal engineered by Donald Trump had already begun reshaping the foundations of global power. By this stage, Russia is no longer the dominant actor it once appeared to be. Economically weakened, politically fractured, and strategically isolated, the empire faces an unavoidable truth. Survival is no longer the same as supremacy. The empire begins to fracture. Empires rarely fall in dramatic, visible ways. There is no single cataclysmic event. They collapse quietly, one failure at a time. And Russia, under the pressure of Trump's secret Ukraine deal, is experiencing precisely the type of erosion. Energy revenues continue to dwindle as Europe and Asia turn to alternative suppliers. Regional governors in Siberia, Chechnya, and the Far East assert more independence, hoarding resources and questioning Moscow's authority. Military morale plummets as troops face shortages and unclear objectives. Even the elite, once loyal oligarchs and bureaucrats, begin to hedge their bets, quietly transferring assets abroad and reducing support for central authority. What remains is a hollow empire, impressive on paper, but fragile and increasingly incapable of projecting power beyond its borders. Economic collapse as the silent killer. The deal's most insidious weapon has been economic, by redirecting energy routes, accelerating reconstruction in Ukraine, and tying international trade to enforceable sanctions. The plan slowly suffocates Russia's financial system. Inflation surges, reducing purchasing power and eroding public trust. Currency devaluation makes imports prohibitively expensive, crippling everyday life. Industrial production declines as factories struggle with energy costs and disrupted supply chains. Unlike conventional military defeat, this collapse is slow, cumulative, and unstoppable. Each month, the Kremlin finds itself forced to spend more to maintain the status quo, yet receive less in return. Every attempt to regain control only accelerates decline. This is not chaos born of rebellion. It is chaos born of inevitability. The strategic isolation intensifies. By now, Russia is also geopolitically isolated. Former allies are reconsidering loyalties. Countries once dependent on Moscow's influence now seek alternative partnerships. Eastern European nations pivot toward NATO and US-led initiatives. Middle Eastern suppliers leverage Russia's weakening position to renegotiate energy contracts. China recalculates its strategic alignment, understanding that Russia can no longer serve as a reliable partner in Eurasian geopolitics. Isolation compounds the internal crisis. With fewer avenues for external support, Moscow's choices become increasingly limited. Its foreign policy options narrow, while domestic tensions rise. In short, the empire survives only as long as it can maintain illusions of control. Illusions that are crumbling by the day. The psychological toll empires are not held together by maps or armies alone. They are held together by perception. The belief among citizens, soldiers, and elites that the state is unshakable. Citizens feel the squeeze of rising prices, shortages, and stagnation. Soldiers lose confidence as operations extend without tangible results. Regional authorities start calculating their own survival, independent of Moscow's directives. When perception breaks, control follows. Russia is experiencing this breakdown in real time, setting the stage for internal fragmentation that no battlefield victory can reverse. The dominoes of defeat. The collapse of Russia's empire is not instantaneous, but it is systematic. Consider the sequence of dominoes being knocked over. Economic pressure reduces Moscow's capacity to fund operations. Energy loss diminishes influence over Europe and global markets. Elite fracture leads to internal competition and corruption. Military stagnation erodes morale and operational efficiency. Psychological collapse undermines citizen trust and loyalty. Geopolitical isolation eliminates potential allies or support. Each step reinforces the next, creating a feedback loop that ensures eventual collapse. By the time the world realizes what has happened, the empire is no longer functioning as a coherent power. It exists only in name. Ukraine and the new balance of power. For Ukraine, this deal secures a historic transformation. No longer a dependent battlefield state, Kyiv emerges as a strategic hub, militarily capable, yet integrated with Western systems economically strengthened through reconstruction and trade initiatives. Politically relevant on the global stage, not just as a recipient of aid, this shift fundamentally changes Europe's security architecture. Countries previously cautious of Russian retaliation now act decisively, confident that Moscow no longer has the leverage to enforce compliance. In essence, Trump's deal guarantees Ukraine a permanent seat at the table, altering the balance of power in Europe for decades. The United States' strategic victory beyond Ukraine, the United States reasserts itself as a global architect. The secret deal demonstrates a return to realist strategy, winning not through endless conflict, but through leverage, foresight, and patience. Washington gains long-term influence over European energy and political decisions, strategic control over reconstruction and trade frameworks in Ukraine, the ability to project power indirectly without direct occupation or intervention. This is power exercised subtly but decisively, the hallmark of a geopolitical masterstroke. The quiet end of an empire. By late 2025, Russia's empire is no longer an unstoppable force. It survives, but only barely. Its borders remain, but influence beyond them has collapsed. Its military exists, but operations are unsustainable. Its leadership endures, but authority is eroding. History rarely notes the exact moment an empire ends. Often, it is a quiet, slow process, the final chapter written in economic reports, internal memos, and the shifting allegiances of once loyal allies. Trump's secret deal ensures that this end comes systematically, leaving no room for recovery, no path for reversal, and no illusions of invincibility. A new world emerges. The war in Ukraine was never only a regional conflict. Through a combination of secrecy, strategy, and timing, Trump's secret Ukraine deal initiated a chain reaction that will reshape global geopolitics forever. Russia loses its empire, influence, and relevance. Europe gains autonomy and security. Ukraine rises as a permanent strategic partner. The United States reasserts its global authority. Other powers, including China and Middle Eastern nations, must recalibrate their positions. Empires do not collapse because of battles alone. They collapse because their foundations are undermined in ways the public cannot see. And this is precisely what has happened with Russia. Final words for the viewer. History is rarely written in headlines. Often it is written in secret deals, whispered negotiations, and strategies executed far from public scrutiny. Trump ES secret Ukraine deal will not make for flashy news stories, but its impact will be felt for generations. The Russian Empire, once feared and seemingly unassailable, is now facing a quiet, systematic end. The world order is shifting, power is redistributing, and the consequences will echo across continents. And it all began with a plan that the world was never supposed to see. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, geopolitics, and secret strategies, make sure to like and subscribe for more content from Hidden History Vault. Every subscriber helps uncover the stories that shape our world.